Hey, it's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. And a word from a couple of Texans this week. One that we can actually see and hear, another one via Instagram. But news with, I guess, news. Tank Dell and Joe Mixon with perhaps some signs for encouragement, as well as some coaching movement with the Texans and some of the coaching hires around the league that might have a trickle-down effect on the Texans, for better or for worse. And we'll get into all of that and more. FanDuel's got some great things going right now. Look, the line is still Seahawks minus 4.5. And that didn't move at all with the news that Drake May is on the injury report. I still feel good about the Seahawks in this game. But as you guys know, whenever I choose a favorite, I start immediately thinking about all the different ways that the Patriots could upend the Seahawks. And I will doubt that and then come to some kind of firm resolution by the end of next week. I'll be in San Francisco all next week. And they don't call it Radio Row anymore. I think they call it Media Row, whatever it is. We're trying to, streamline this thing for the internet and whatnot. But Tank Dell, he was at Academy buying some gear for some kids, doing a nice thing in the community out there the other day. And Sam Warren and Jonathan Alexander from the Chronicle, I got these clips from him at his press availability. Here is Tank Dell talking about how he made a push to try to get back and play last year.
Making a push, I want to be out there with the guys this year. Last year, that football season alone was like the hardest year of my life, man. Just sitting out from football for like a year straight. Been playing football since I was 5, and that was my first year I ever had to sit out of football. So that was hard, but I tried to make a push back. It didn't go as planned, but I got time now and I'll be ready.
Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me because he had kind of hinted at his Instagram almost that he might be making a comeback or something. So we let ourselves get our hopes up there for a little while. I wonder how much of this was Tank Dell really wanting to make a push for it and thinking, hey, maybe I'll be there, and the medical staff holding him back. Maybe the medical staff felt that, okay, it was a possibility, but they don't want to risk it. So who knows? I think that Tank Dell, as he alluded to there, mentioned there, he's just hadn't been through anything like this. Very few people have had as devastating or as gruesome a knee injury as Tank Dell has had, but guys have come back from it before. Nick Chubb had a gruesome injury already when he was a young man and came back from it and went on to do great things. And then he had his second gruesome knee injury 2 years ago. He's having a harder time coming back from that, as age and size and wear and tear from playing in the NFL will do. I think, and that's one of the things that makes me optimistic about Tank Dell, is that he is younger, hadn't had a bunch of actual joint damage before that. He had a broken leg, he had his gunshot wound, but the structural integrity of the knee, I'm not a doctor, but I've had a lot of orthopedic injuries, was a little bit more pristine to begin with. He's not as heavy a guy as Nick Chubb, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a really good chance he's going to come back and be a viable wide receiver. Will they ever regain that electric athleticism? I don't know. It's impossible to say. But Nick Caserio had said, hey, he's going to be back probably to start and participate in the offseason program. And from there, we'll take it as they go. The other big thing, even because Cecil Shorts, I know, has mentioned at times, and I think he did on this podcast earlier in the season, but I'm not sure. Cecil had a similarly really traumatic knee injury with multiple tendons and ligaments, and Cecil was worried that this might be a career ender. I would say that on the medical side of things, even in the last 10 years, there's so much more advanced in the stem cell treatment and the PRP. 3 other things that I looked up this morning that I can't remember the name of. They've come a long way, and being able to regrow a lot of whether it's circulatory or nervous system or anything else that tends to come with these catastrophic knee injuries. I think they're better than they've ever been at being able to get a positive outcome of this. So fingers crossed, and we'll see Tank Dell out there, maybe during OTAs, maybe during minicamp, we'll see. But I think there's a definite possibility. The one that I have still zero idea on how to gauge my optimism or pessimism about is Joe Mixon. But he did post this to Instagram. Vengeance, all 26, with a shaking hands emoji, and there's a picture of Joe Mixon and CJ Stroud, for those of you listening, not watching on YouTube. Like pretty clear right there. I know Jonathan Alexander had said that, I think Jonathan Alexander's article said something like Joe Mixon insists he'll be back for 26. I don't know if that's reading into it too much or anything. He is talking about vengeance, and there's a picture of him and CJ Stroud together. I'm all for it if that's what it is. I just don't know if they still know exactly what's wrong with Joe Mixon. This is Nick Caserio talking about Joe Mixon's status in his press conference last week.
Yeah, no, I would say he didn't do anything off the field. It wasn't like he was riding like a snowmobile or anything like that. I'd say it was just more of a medical condition or situation that just it really didn't improve maybe as much as everybody would have hoped. I mean, I'm not trying to like evade the question. I think that's the reality of the situation. So like he didn't jump off a building, like he wasn't cliff diving or anything like that. He wasn't doing anything irresponsible. It was a freak thing. Honestly, I've never seen it. You know, just the condition.
Hope that situation will improve before next summer.
We'll see. I mean, believe me, I'm not smart enough to be a doctor, so I mean, I'll leave that up to the medical experts. And you know, once we going back to some of the earlier questions, we get a little bit more clarity, more information, then we'll kind of see where we are moving forward.
Look, with all due respect to doctors, Nick, I've met some dumb ones. I think Nick could have been a doctor if that's what he chose to do. I feel like I'm smart enough to be a doctor, but I do not nearly have the same ability to stay in the same place for 7 or 8 years studying to be one thing. But I digress. The medical mystery about it is what makes me the most nervous. And I think that Joe Mixon might be dialed in and focused, which is good. I guess that at the very least, we know that based on various social media posts that he's made over the past few weeks or months, it seems like he's preparing to play next year. What does that mean with the Texans? And they want to absorb his cap hit, you know, on the gamble that he's going to be okay. I don't know. I think there's a very good chance they draft a running back again. And that doesn't mean I don't like Woody Marks or that they don't like Woody Marks. One of the things that was unfortunate about having to use Woody Marks as your feature back or your lead back over the second half of the season was they kind of stalled out on using Woody Marks as a receiver. And when you get a guy that had the number of receptions and production as a receiving back in college, comes out of 2 air raid systems, I think they very much like the idea of Woody Marks having this outlet, whether it's a check down or a guy on a wheel route or whatever it might be, to give him one more option to be an explosive passer, even when pass protection breaks down or the coverage doesn't allow you to go downfield. That's a big part of why they drafted Woody Marks. But when you're trying to develop a rookie running back who's going to get the lion's share of the carries running the ball, they probably had to just pull back a little bit on how much they wanted to put on his plate and how much they could use him as a receiver. So the 1-2 punch of a guy like Joe Mixon combined with a guy like Woody Marks, that gets really exciting. And I think that's probably what most Texans fans are hoping for with Woody Marks. I don't need him to lead the league in rushing. I would love to see him on a graphic where, in terms of all-purpose yards, combined rushing and receiving, Woody Marks is the league leader. And I think that's most viable if he's got somebody like Joe Mixon next to him, or perhaps a free agent or somebody. We talked about some of the free agents in the last episode. The other, the one other clip from Tank Dell that I wanted to play, this one was from, I believe, Jonathan Alexander or Sam Warren, one of those two, is Tank Dell sticking up for his boy, CJ Stroud, who he refers to here as 7.
Say what they want about 7, you know, that's they sitting on the couches just typing on computers or typing on their phones. But everybody know who 7 is, especially in the facility. We know who he is, and when we get back out there with him, it's going to be special. So we can let them say what they want. It's all right.
Yeah, I don't think anybody thought that Tank Dell had all of a sudden lost faith in CJ Stroud because of a bad playoff performance or anything. It would be big news if that was the situation. We went through this morning on Sports Radio 610. I like trying to figure out where there might be any chinks in the armor when it comes to guys having faith or trust in CJ. I certainly don't sense it from anybody on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, Will Anderson and CJ Stroud give all appearances of being very, very close still. And the multiple guys on the defense have professed their trust and faith in CJ Stroud. Likewise, offensively, Dalton Schultz seems real tight with CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, obviously. So I'm not worried about that at all. I think that sometimes, though, too, it's not like just because your teammates have faith in you means that those guys are the best talent evaluators on the team or anything. But this is where I am with CJ Stroud. I think CJ Stroud made a lot of growth in terms of his maturing as a quarterback this year. the shocking thing for me was the way it all kind of fell apart in the playoffs, that his ability to mitigate risk, to use Casario's words, which he had done such a good job of, and understanding, hey, when we're in our own territory in the first half and we've got a lead, we're not going to put the ball in danger the way he did in that Patriots game. It was just really, really curious. And is it a matter of him having to settle in and just be that much more comfortable with everything? Part of it, sure. It's not like he hasn't had good performances in the playoffs. And I might have been guilty of this at some point in the white hot heat afterwards where I was still angry. He hasn't done as well on the road in the playoffs as he has at home. I think part of that can also be attributed to lesser opponents at home in the wild card round. But you go back to the Ravens game and the Chiefs game in his first and second year in the NFL, those were superior football teams to the Houston Texans. And the CJ's performance, particularly in the Chiefs game in his second year, I thought was through 3 quarters still a good performance. Everything fell apart for the offense completely in the fourth quarter of that game, but it wasn't like CJ went out and played like a horrendous quarterback or something in that game. It was just this entire playoffs from in those first 2 games. It was the decision making and everything else, and the poor ball security, everything that went into it that was just so alarming. But he's still a young quarterback, and I think I'm not ignoring the growth that he made this year, even though the statistics didn't look all that eye-popping. That he did a lot of things that would never have suggested that that's how he's going to play in the Patriots game. So that's where I am with it. And the Nick Caley side of it is that I think as a rookie offensive coordinator, he got better as the year went along. He and CJ formed a better relationship. This is a very big year for CJ Stroud, though, and whether Tank Dell believes in him or not, it's got to be a better year next year. I think the personnel still is the biggest hanging issue out there. And, when Nick Caley is retained, I had a conversation with Luke Morrow, who was filling in with Sean Pendergast this morning, about, whether like what percentage of Texans fans might be upset that the Texans didn't get rid of Nick Caley and go for somebody else. I don't sense from the fan base that many people are out on Nick Caley. I think right this moment, they're dialed in on either CJ Stroud himself or the supporting cast around him, the interior offensive line, having a healthy running back to play alongside Woody Marks, deeper wide receivers, a second, Cade Stover either developing or bringing in another tight end. Those are things that I think are going to make the most marked difference in both Nick Caley and CJ Stroud's performance next year. Did CJ play the way he was supposed to play in the playoffs? No. Are some of the mistakes that he made inexcusable no matter who the offensive line is? Yes. But if he had a better offensive line in front of him, if he had Joe Mixon, would his performance have looked better? Yes. He wouldn't have been pressed to make bad decisions. I'm not even making excuses for him at all. That's just the reality of it. You surround a quarterback with better players and a more complete offense, you're going to get a better version of that quarterback. So I'm not absolving him from blame, but also remembering that, man, this offensive line made a lot of improvements. I think they got fundamentally better in a lot of respects, but they're still not as good as they need to be. And I think at least part of the improvement needs to come from a talent upgrade. I think Cole Popovich knows what he's doing as an offensive line coach, but they just need better Jimmies and Joes at multiple positions still to really get a genuinely bona fide offense. One guy did get fired, and it was Jake Moreland, as well as 2 other assistants, but Jake Moreland's the one position coach that got fired. Look, have I ever gotten up and said, man, I can't believe the pathetic job Jake Moreland's doing with these tight ends? I have not. There's multiple things that could go into this. One is that there might simply be a coach that D'Amico or Nick Caley wants to hire and who's now available because of all these coaches being fired this year, that they're going to end up hiring, and they just like him better than Jake Moreland. Dalton Schultz played a lot more like the good version of Dalton Schultz that we saw 2 years ago that got him a contract extension. Cade Stover was already a developmental prospect, and then he misses the first part of the season on IR. You lost Brevin Jordan. So I don't know if this is as much about Jake Moreland himself as it is about potentially there being another option. So that's something to get excited about, and that if there is a guy out there that Nick Caley or D'Amico Ryans really wants and thinks can take that tight end group that much higher, work with the young draft picks or one of the younger guys on the roster, as well as, Brevin Jordan's been banged up a lot, but Kate Stover especially. I think there's an area for opportunity there. So that I look at as more of a positive, as long as they replace it with somebody where you realize, oh, yeah, boy, it was a good plan they had. I approve of this swap out. The two assistant coaches that they might lose who are still out there on the interview circuit is Gerard Johnson, who's still being talked about going to the Eagles as their offensive coordinator. And then Dino Vasso is interviewed for a coordinator's job. When Todd Monken got hired in Cleveland, and I haven't seen Dino Vasso linked to the Browns yet because they still technically have a defensive coordinator in Jim Schwartz. But there was a report that Jim Schwartz was visibly upset and pissed off about the fact that he didn't get the head coaching job and that Todd Monken did. Does he remain in Cleveland? If he doesn't, and that defensive coordinator job is open in Cleveland, look, I would not tell my son to take the head coaching job in Cleveland if he had other opportunities. It's just too much of a mess, too much going on. I wouldn't want to put him through that. I would encourage my son to take the defensive coordinator's job in Cleveland because you're not going to get blamed for the Browns having an awful season. And they have one of the best defenses in the league already. So if you think that Jim Schwartz is a really good defensive coordinator, if you think you can go in there and keep that already really good defense really good, depending on what their personnel moves are in the offseason, I would say take that by all means. So if Dino Vasso were up for that job, I'd get nervous because he's done some really good work with the defensive backs over the years. Look, he was here before D'Amico got here. He's worked with Derek Stingley, Jalen Petrie, Kalen Bullock, Kamari Lassiter. I'm running out of fingers on this hand to count the guys who are young defensive backs who are playing like some of the best defensive backs in the league. You have to credit position coaching for some of that. And I know the Texans run a simple scheme, et cetera, et cetera. One of the reasons you can run a simple scheme is when guys are coached up really well. Rod Wright, the defensive line coach, I think he does a great job getting the absolute best out of defensive linemen that you don't get all that excited about when you hear the Texans sign him, and then all of a sudden these guys are playing the best they have in their career. A lot of that comes down to a combination of scheme, but then coaches coaching those techniques really, really well. You can get away with having a simple scheme when guys are playing their techniques perfectly. That's how the Legion of Boom was back in the day. A relatively simple scheme, but guys are just executing at the highest level in terms of their technique, responsibilities, everything else. So those are Dino Vasso and Gerard Johnson. A little bit nervous about that. With Gerard Johnson, two things can be true. One, Gerard Johnson could be a really good quarterbacks coach. Two, sometimes a different perspective or a different voice in a quarterback's head could be a good thing, even if he's got a good relationship with the current quarterback's coach. So it's not like Gerard Johnson is getting fired. He might just get hired away. It could still be a positive if CJ, just by working somebody with a different point of view, different background, different experiences and everything, he might get more out of that. The comparison I always make is just Tiger Woods with his swing coaches. It's not like Tiger Woods, every time he changed his swing coach, was doing it because, oh, this guy's obviously a bad swing coach. Tiger would win multiple titles and then go on and change his swing coach because he just felt like he wanted to do something different, keep himself challenged, whatever it might be. And like hitting coaches in baseball, you could go on and on and on and find just, guys that just move on and want to see a different perspective. That could end up being really good for CJ Stroud. And as we prepare ourselves to watch a Super Bowl in which the Texans are not participating, it's fun to still think and dream about what might be. I think the prop bets in this game, the first ones I looked at on FanDuel, were really interesting because I look at these first 5 prop bets I saw, and it was all about whether or not records would be set. And they're all these offensive records versus 2 really good defenses. I have a hard time seeing anybody pass for 506 yards. I have a hard time seeing any player having 216 plus receiving yards. I have a hard time seeing any player rush for over 205 yards in this game. And I have to scroll all the way down to any player to record 15 plus receptions. Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think, is capable of doing that, especially with 2 weeks of game planning. Usually in the Super Bowl, you look at the team that you look at as the superior and you wonder, all right, are they going to really figure out ways to spring their guys open, add a few wrinkles in? I think Clint Kubiak with the Seahawks has the ability to do that. 15 plus is pretty damn ambitious. He ended up having 9 the other day. but that was also where they limited how much Jackson Smith-Njigba got in the second half. I think he had an 8 in the first half and ended up with just 2 in the second half. If he was on pace for 15 plus in the second half, that's the 1-1 I would feel potentially I might could move my needle a little bit. The other thing that I talked about with Luke Morrow this morning on Sports Radio 610 that has been sticking in my brain, and it's annoying me that it is Luke brought up the Tennessee Titans as the team that could be next year's New England Patriots. And immediately, the text line was alight with people calling him an idiot. What are you talking about? It's the Titans, you clown. That was my initial reaction too. He made some really good points and arguments for it. The first thing I thought was, all right, well, let's look at the overall roster strength for the Titans now compared to what it was for the Patriots last year. So headed into last year, the Patriots were, I believe, ranked 25th by PFF in terms of overall roster strength. The Titans were either 31st or 32nd. And then, boom, you fast forward less than a year, and the Titans are probably going to be graded way higher on PFF because guys perform better when they're on good teams, et cetera, et cetera. There's that positive snowball effect. So that's kind of I can't talk about the overall roster strength. Plus, every time I think of the Titans, I think of those 2 interior defensive linemen and just how damn good they are and how much trouble the Texans have with them. But the few things that he brought up was, okay, you look at the Patriots, you got Josh McDaniels, veteran offensive coordinator, working with a second-year quarterback in Drake May, did incredible things with him. Likewise, in Tennessee, they got Brian Daboll working with Cam Ward. I can't sit here and say that Cam Ward can't be as good as Drake May. I can say that I'm not as impressed by Brian Daboll as I am by Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels has become that quintessential awesome offensive coordinator. I don't know what he is as a head coach. He's had 2 disastrous runs as a head coach, not to mention like 9 days of being the named coach in Indianapolis before he bailed out of that. So it's been a real rough road for him as a head coach, but he's been a really good offensive coordinator. So I give that a thumbs down on the Brian Daboll versus Josh McDaniels comparison. Defensive-minded head coach who does really good things for the defense. I could see that playing out. I think especially with offseason acquisitions, and they've got a boatload of cap space. So just like the Patriots were very, very aggressive in turning over their roster, the Titans have the ability to do that if they choose. And I think Robert Saleh really knows what he's doing with defenses and could end up with a very competitive defense in short order over there. So I would say that holds true. And then if you talk about offseason acquisitions, look, the Patriots added Stephon Diggs last year, spent pretty aggressively to get him. In that PFF preseason ranking, that was when Stephon Diggs was still coming off his ACL injury. There are all kinds of reports that he wasn't around the building enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now he's in a freaking Super Bowl. That's something to watch, but it's possible for them to pull that off. They will have an easy schedule because they're playing that last place schedule. Is it going to be as easy as the New England Patriots? Highly unlikely. I haven't looked at their common opponents yet, but the Patriots had one of the easiest schedules in the history of football based on DVOA. The other X factor would be that I think the Titans' offensive line wasn't as good as they should have been. And even though they, had one of the all-time most highly regarded offensive line coaches in Callahan, might just not have been the right fit. So if they can get that offensive line right and get the best out of some of those younger players, not to mention bolster through free agency in the draft, I could possibly see it happening. This is the one thing that's holding me back. We're talking about the Titans as an organization, and we're talking about whether the Titans could pull off what the Patriots did this year. The Titans were once coached by Mike Vrabel. They couldn't pull off what the Patriots did when they had the coach who's pulling off what the Patriots did in the building 3 years ago. So no, I cannot for the life of me think that all of a sudden the Titans as an organization are going to turn it around. I'm retroactively angry at Luke Morrow for even having me discuss this right now. That's how disgusted I am with it. I do think that there's the fan base, I can tell, got my finger in the air on this, is starting to swing back towards a more measured take about CJ Stroud. I do think, though, that much like the James Harden days back with the Houston Rockets, where we would spend the entire regular season just kind of waiting to see which version of James Harden showed up, And yes, I know C.J. Stroud is not playing at the same level in the regular season that James Harden has played in the regular season in his career. But it is still that same dynamic where we're just going to be waiting and wondering and just seeing, okay, who's the C.J. Stroud that's going to show up in the playoffs? I'll feel a lot more confident about it as long as as long as it's a better offense in the regular season and if they have a good rushing attack. You get into those playoff games, and if you don't have a bona fide stud rushing attack, man, it gets a lot easier when everybody's so focusing all of their energy on this week and this week alone to really bring out the worst in a quarterback. And CJ's going to learn some hard lessons from this last performance. He'll reflect on it, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks everybody for watching. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple, give a 5-star review and some nice fluffy words of praise if you see fit. And thanks to Believe for sponsoring the Believe in Texans podcast.